The balloons were tied to the ceiling, the confetti cannons ready, the box with either pink or blue smoke in the center of the yard. And me, the grandfather, hearing, "It's better if you don't come in so you don't ruin the mood. We'll send you the pictures later, okay?" I swallowed hard. The laughter went on, the posing for the cameras too. But for me, it wasn't a party. It was a door slammed shut in my own family's face. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just felt my dignity pull me by the hand. Right there, in silence, I decided that would be the last time they treated me like a burden. If they had a reveal, I had one of my own. Minutes later, when everyone was waiting for the smoke to rise, I opened my folder. What I laid on that table had no shade of pink or blue. It carried the weight of truth, and it cut deeper than any confetti could, because a grandfather's love isn't just background for a celebration. Respect is not an optional invitation. Sometimes life demands that we turn humiliation into boundaries, ingratitude into justice, and show without yelling that family is something you must also earn. This is my story. Hi, I'm John Doe, and today you'll find out how I turned the tables on the very day they told me I would ruin the celebration. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, have you ever been excluded from a family celebration yourself? But before I reveal what I showed at that gender reveal and why some faces turned pale the very moment I did, I need to tell you who I was before that day and why they came to the cruel conclusion that I didn't deserve to be there. Only then will you understand the strength that rose within me, the strength that turned scorn into justice and gave me back my place in the family. My name is John Doe. I'm 59 years old, and for the past 35 years I built something I was genuinely proud of, a chain of independent bookstores called Chapter and Verse here in Portland, Oregon. Not Amazon, not Barnes & Noble, just honest, community-focused bookstores where neighbors could find both bestsellers and local authors, where kids could attend story time on Saturday mornings, and where Dorothy, my wife of 31 years, hosted her famous book clubs every Tuesday evening. When I sold the business 2 years ago, it wasn't because I was forced to. The digital world hadn't killed us like it did so many others. We'd adapted, thrived even. We had online sales, ebook partnerships, and a coffee shop in each location that had become the heart of 3 different neighborhoods. I sold because I wanted time. Time with Dorothy, time with family, time to give back to the community that had supported us all those years. That's who I was, before Jessica Martinez became my daughter-in-law. A respected businessman, a pillar of the community, someone people came to for advice or help. The Oregonian had even done a feature on us titled Local Heroes, the bookstore owners who never gave up. Dorothy still has that article framed in our kitchen. Michael, my son, met Jessica 3 years ago at a charity auction I'd organized for the Children's Literacy Foundation. She was volunteering at the registration table, beautiful in that carefully polished way that takes hours to achieve, her smile bright and practiced. Michael was immediately smitten. At 32, he'd always been a bit awkward around women, more comfortable with his computer programming than social situations. Jessica represented everything he thought he couldn't have: confidence, beauty, social grace. I should have paid closer attention to the details that night. Should have. Noticed how Jessica's eyes calculated the value of every item up for auction. Should have wondered why a woman who claimed to be passionate about children's literacy couldn't name a single children's book author when Dorothy tried to make conversation. Should have questioned why someone so dedicated to charity work knew so little about the foundation she was supposedly volunteering for, but I was focused on the success of the event. We raised $47,000 that night for books and reading programs in underserved schools. I was proud, optimistic, generous in my assessment of everyone around me, Classic mistake for someone who'd spent decades believing the best. In people, Michael and Jessica's relationship moved fast. Engagement after 8 months, marriage 6 months later. I paid for the wedding, of course, $43,000 for what Jessica called intimate elegance at the Columbia River Gorge. Dorothy had suggested something smaller, more personal, but Jessica had dreams that required significant funding, and I was happy to provide it. This was my son's happiness we were talking about. The red flags started small. Jessica would make subtle comments about our outdated furniture when they visited. She'd wrinkle her nose at Dorothy's home cooking, claiming allergies that seemed to appear conveniently whenever we hosted family dinners. She had strong opinions about everything, our vacation choices, our charitable giving, even the books Dorothy recommended for her book club. "John gives away too much money," she told Michael one Sunday afternoon, not realizing I could hear from the kitchen. "Successful people invest in their families first, not every sob story that comes along." But the real turning point came 6 months ago on what should have been an ordinary Thursday morning. I was setting up for our annual Books for Backpacks charity drive, preparing to distribute free books and school supplies to families who needed them. It was our biggest community outreach event, something Dorothy and I had organized every August since opening our first store. That's when I saw Jessica in the back room of the community center, hunched over a stack of papers with an expression I'd never seen before, focused, calculating, secretive. She didn't see me approaching until I was close enough to read the header on the documents. Bright Futures Children's Foundation. Financial distribution records. The numbers didn't make sense. According to the papers in Jessica's hands, the foundation had received donations totaling over $200,000 in the past year. But the actual programs they'd funded, the ones I knew about because I'd attended the board meetings, had only cost about $120,000. "Jessica," I said quietly, not wanting to startle her. "What are you working on?" She spun around so fast that papers scattered across the table. Her face went through 3 distinct expressions in about 2 seconds. Shock, fear, then that practiced smile she wore like armor. "Oh, John, I didn't hear you come in." She began gathering the papers quickly, but not before I caught sight of several bank statements and what looked like altered receipts. "Just organizing some filing for Patricia. You know how chaotic charity bookkeeping can be." Patricia Wells was the foundation's director, a woman I'd known for 15 years. She was meticulous about record keeping, had an accounting background, and definitely didn't need help with chaotic bookkeeping. But Jessica was already sliding the papers into a manila folder, her movements sharp and protective. Something cold settled in my stomach. Not suspicion yet, but unease. "Is Patricia here today? I wanted to discuss the reading program expansion we talked about last month." "She's out sick, food poisoning. I offered to help catch up on some administrative work." Jessica's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she sealed the folder. "I should probably get going, though. Michael's expecting me for lunch." She left quickly, taking the folder with her, leaving me standing in the empty community center room with questions I couldn't yet articulate. That night I called Patricia. She answered on the second ring, sounding perfectly healthy and confused about Jessica's claim. Sick. I was at the foundation office all day yesterday. Jessica wasn't scheduled to help with anything. Patricia paused. "John, is something wrong? You sound concerned." I made an excuse about mixed dates and hung up, but sleep didn't come easily that night. Dorothy found me in our home office at 2 a.m, staring at our own foundation records. "Can't sleep?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Patricia wasn't sick yesterday," I said finally. Dorothy's expression sharpened. She'd been skeptical of Jessica from the beginning, though she'd kept her concerns mostly to herself for Michael's sake. What was Jessica really doing? "I don't know. But I think I need to find out. The next morning brought one of those crisp Portland autumns that makes you grateful to live in the Pacific Northwest. The maple trees outside our bedroom window were putting on their annual show, all gold and crimson against the grey sky. Dorothy was already downstairs making coffee, probably reading the news on her tablet and mentally planning her day around the book club meeting she was hosting that evening. Normal. Everything was normal, except for the questions that had kept me awake most of the night. I found myself driving to the Bright Futures Foundation office without really planning to. Their small building on Southeast Hawthorne housed 3 different non-profits, including the Children's Literacy Program, that had become such an important part of our retirement activities. Patricia's office was on the 2nd floor, and she greeted me with the warm smile of someone who'd known me long enough to see through any pretense. John, 2 visits in 2 days? To what do I owe the pleasure? Patricia Wells was 63, a former high school principal who'd thrown herself into non-profit work after her husband died 5 years ago. She had steel-grey hair that she kept in a practical bob, reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck, and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from dealing with teenagers for 30 years. I wanted to follow up on something, I said, settling into the chair across from her cluttered desk. Yesterday, when I stopped by the community center, Jessica said she was helping you with some administrative work, financial records. Patricia's expression shifted to polite confusion. Jessica, your daughter-in-law, Jessica? She had foundation documents, bank statements, distribution records, said you were out sick and she was helping catch up on filing. John. Patricia leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. I've never asked Jessica to help with foundation work. She's not authorized to access our financial records, and I certainly wasn't sick yesterday. The cold feeling in my stomach spread outward. She had papers, Patricia, official-looking documents with the foundation letterhead. What kind of papers? I described what I'd seen. The donation totals, the distribution records, the bank statements. Patricia listened with increasing concern, occasionally asking clarifying questions that made it clear she knew exactly which documents I was describing. Those records are confidential, she said finally. They're kept in a locked filing cabinet in my office. Only board members have access, and even then, only during official meetings. Could she have gotten copies somewhere else? Patricia was quiet for a long moment, then walked to her filing cabinet. She unlocked it with a key from her desk drawer and pulled out a folder labeled 2023 Financial Reports. Her face went pale as she flipped through the contents. John, these documents are copies of our quarterly reports. But look at this. She handed me a page that should have shown donation totals. The numbers had been altered, clumsily, with what looked like correction fluid and a different pen. Someone's been doctoring our records, I said, though the words felt surreal. This was Jessica we were talking about, my son's wife. The woman who organized charity events and posed for photos at literacy fundraisers. It's worse than that. Patricia pulled out more documents. These altered records make it look like we've received significantly more in donations than we actually have. If someone was using these for grant applications or donor reports, they could be claiming money that doesn't exist, or money that exists but went somewhere else. We spent the next hour going through every financial document in Patricia's files. The pattern became clear and nauseating. Someone had systematically altered records to inflate donation amounts, changed distribution totals to hide gaps in funding, and even forged receipts for programs that had never been fully implemented. Patricia, I need to ask you something difficult, I said finally. How often does Jessica volunteer here? She doesn't. Not really. Patricia sat back in her chair, looking exhausted. She shows up for photo opportunities at events, helps with registration tables where she can network with donors, but actual hands-on volunteer work, I can't remember the last time. but she's listed as a volunteer coordinator on your website. That was Michael's request. He said Jessica wanted to be more involved in community service and it would look good for her resume. I agreed to the title, but honestly, I handle all the coordination myself. The pieces were falling into place in a way that made me sick. Jessica had a title that gave her credibility, access to events where she could network with donors, and apparently enough inside knowledge to forge convincing documents. Patricia, I think we need to do a complete audit of foundation finances. And I think we need to do it quietly, without letting anyone know what we're looking for. Are you suggesting Jessica has been embezzling from the foundation? The word hung in the air between us, like a weapon. Embezzlement. My daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandchild, a thief who stole from children's literacy programs. I'm suggesting we need to know exactly where every dollar has gone for the past 2 years. Patricia nodded grimly. I'll call our accountant today. But John, if what you're thinking is true, this isn't just about the foundation. This is fraud. This is criminal. I drove home through familiar Portland streets that suddenly felt foreign. How do you go home to your family and pretend everything is normal when you suspect one of them is a criminal? How do you look your son in the eye and make small talk when you're investigating his wife? Dorothy was in the garden when I pulled into our driveway, deadheading the last of the season's roses. She looked up as I approached, took one look at my face, and set down her pruning shears. What did you find out? I told her everything. The altered documents, Patricia's confusion, the systematic pattern of financial manipulation. Dorothy listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. That poor girl, she said finally. Poor girl. Dorothy, she's stealing money from children's programs. No, I mean Patricia, and the foundation, and... Dorothy paused, looking toward our house where family photos lined the mantelpiece inside. And Michael, he has no idea, does he? I don't think so. Jessica keeps him pretty isolated from her volunteer work. Always has excuses for why he can't come to events, why he doesn't need to be involved. What are you going to do? It was the question I'd been dreading. What do you do when your family loyalty conflicts with your moral obligations? When protecting your son means enabling his wife's criminal behavior? I'm going to get proof, I said finally. Real, undeniable evidence of what she's been doing, and then what, John? And then I'm going to give her a chance to make it right before anyone else has to know. Dorothy studied my face. You're going to confront her. I'm going. To offer her a way out, a chance to return the money, make amends, get help if she needs it, for Michael's sake, for the baby's sake. And if she refuses... I looked at our house, at the life Dorothy and I had built on principles of honesty and community service. At the foundation we'd supported for 15 years, the children whose reading programs were being funded with stolen money. Then I'll do what's right, regardless of the family consequences. That evening, Dorothy's book club met in our living room as usual. 8 women between the ages of 55 and 70 discussing this month's selection over wine and cheese. I could hear their laughter from my office, where I was starting to build a file of everything I knew about Jessica's activities. Normal life was continuing around me, but I was already living in a different world. A world where my daughter-in-law was a criminal, where my son was being deceived, and where I was about to become either the family savior or the family destroyer. The choice, I was beginning to realize, might not be up to me. The Portland Public Library's downtown branch has always been one of my favorite places in the city. Even after running bookstores for 3 decades, I still found something magical about those high ceilings, the way afternoon light filtered through tall windows, and the quiet energy of people pursuing knowledge. It seemed like the perfect place to research someone's background without arousing suspicion. I told Dorothy I was researching potential book donations for the prison literacy program. Not technically a lie, since I did plan to follow up on that project eventually. But my real purpose was to learn everything I could about Jessica Martinez's history before she became Jessica Doe. What I found in 2 hours of careful searching made my blood run cold. Jessica Martinez had been a volunteer coordinator for 3 different nonprofits in California before moving to Oregon. Each position had lasted less than 2 years. Each organization had experienced administrative difficulties shortly after her departure. One had folded entirely due to what their final public statement called unexpected financial shortfalls, despite strong donor support. The most damning information came from a small news item in the San Jose Mercury News from 4 years ago. Former volunteer coordinator sought for questioning in non-profit audit. The article was brief, mentioning a Jessica Martinez who had left her position at a youth development charity shortly before auditors discovered significant discrepancies in financial records. No charges had been filed, the article noted, due to insufficient evidence and the subject's relocation out of state. The timeline matched perfectly. Jessica had moved to Portland 3.5 years ago, 6 months before the news article was published. She'd told Michael she was starting fresh after a difficult breakup, looking for a place where she could make a difference in people's lives. She'd been running from an investigation. I printed everything I could find and drove home with a folder full of evidence that my son had married a professional con artist. The question was no longer whether Jessica was stealing from the Bright Futures Foundation. The question was how much damage she'd already done and whether I could stop her before she destroyed more lives. Dorothy was arranging flowers when I walked into the kitchen, her movements sharp with the kind of controlled energy that meant she was worried. She looked up as I set the folder on our granite countertop. "How bad is it?" "Worse than we thought." I showed her the articles, the pattern of non-profit involvement followed by financial scandals. "She's done this before, multiple times." Dorothy sat down heavily in one of our kitchen chairs. "Michael's going to be devastated." "Michael doesn't know yet, and maybe he doesn't have to if we handle this right." "John." Dorothy's voice carried a warning. "This woman is a professional criminal. She didn't accidentally stumble into fraud. She targeted our family because of your reputation and your connections in the nonprofit community." The truth of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Jessica hadn't fallen in love with Michael's shy charm or his programming skills. She'd researched us, identified us as marks, and executed a long-term con that included marriage and pregnancy to ensure maximum access and protection. "She's carrying our grandchild," I said quietly. "She's also stealing money from children's literacy programs." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the situation settling around us like fog rolling in from the Columbia River. Outside our kitchen window, Mrs. Patterson from next door was walking her ancient golden retriever, the same routine they'd followed for the past 8 years, normal life continuing obliviously while our world shifted beneath our feet. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Michael, Dad, can you and Mom come to dinner Friday? Jessica wants to discuss baby preparations with you both." The irony was breathtaking. Jessica wanted to discuss baby preparations while I sat with evidence that she was a career criminal who had targeted our family for financial exploitation. I showed the message to Dorothy. "What do I say?" "You say yes. We need to act normal until we decide how to handle this." "And how do we handle this?" Dorothy stood up and walked to our kitchen window, looking out at the neighborhood we'd called home for 22 years. When she turned back to me, her expression was resolute. "You're going to confront her, privately, before Friday's dinner. You're going to give her exactly one chance to confess everything, return the money, and leave our family alone. And if she refuses, then we protect Michael the only way we can. We expose her before she can do any more damage." That night, I called Patricia Wells and asked her to expedite the financial audit. She'd already spoken with their accountant, who promised preliminary results within 48 hours. The scope of the investigation was expanding as they dug deeper into foundation records. "John, there's something else," Patricia said, her voice tight with stress. I called the other board members to give them a heads up about potential irregularities. Linda Morrison mentioned something troubling. Linda Morrison was one of our longtime board members, a retired teacher who donated countless hours to the literacy program. She was also someone Jessica had cultivated a friendship with, often asking for advice about effective fundraising strategies. What did Linda say? Jessica approached her 3 weeks ago about making a substantial donation. Said the foundation needed emergency funding for a new reading program in rural schools. Asked for $15,000, claiming it would be matched by federal grants. There's no rural schools program. Exactly. And there are no federal grants pending. Linda didn't make the donation because she wanted to discuss it with the full board first. But Jessica was convincing. She had documentation, letterhead, even what looked like approval from the school districts. Professional-level fraud. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was sophisticated criminal enterprise. Jessica had been planning this for months, possibly since the day she married Michael. "Patricia, I need you to document everything. Every interaction with Jessica, every request she's made, every piece of foundation business she's been involved with. And I need you to secure all financial records immediately." "Already done. And John, I think you should call the police." I stared out my office window at the streetlights illuminating our quiet neighborhood. 2 blocks away, Michael and Jessica were probably settling in for the evening, maybe discussing baby names or nursery colors. Michael was living in a fairy tale while his wife orchestrated criminal activity behind his back. "Not yet," I said finally. "Let me try something else first." The next morning, I drove to Jessica's volunteer job at the downtown community center, where she helped coordinate services for homeless families. At least, that's what she'd told Michael she was doing. I wanted to see for myself what her actual activities involved. The community center's director, Maria Santos, knew me from various charitable initiatives over the years. She greeted me warmly and was happy to give me a tour of their programs. "We're so grateful for Jessica's help," Maria said as we walked through their family services area. "She's been instrumental in helping us apply for new grant funding." "What kind of grants?" "Educational support for children in transitional housing. Jessica's connections in the literacy community have opened doors we couldn't access before." My stomach dropped. "What connections?" "Well, her work with the Bright Futures Foundation, of course, and her relationships with major donors through her family connections. She mentioned that her father-in-law runs one of the city's most successful bookstore chains. I'd never run a chain. Chapter and Verse had been 3 independent stores, and I'd sold the business 2 years ago. But Jessica was using my reputation to legitimize her grant applications, probably with the same false documentation she'd used. Everywhere else, has she been successful with the grant applications? Oh yes, we received preliminary approval for a $40,000 education grant just last week. Jessica handled all the paperwork. I excused myself and stepped outside to call Patricia Wells. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they created was even worse than I'd imagined. "Patricia, I need you to check if Jessica has been using the Foundation's credentials to apply for grants with other organizations." "What kind of grants?" I described my conversation with Maria Santos. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, then cursed softly. "John, if she's been representing herself as an official foundation representative to apply for grants, that's federal fraud. Mail fraud, wire fraud, possibly RICO violations if she's been doing it systematically. How much money are we talking about? I don't know yet. But if she's been doing this with multiple organizations, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars." I ended the call and stood on the sidewalk outside the community center, watching normal people go about their normal day. A mother pushing a stroller, an elderly man walking his dog, teenagers waiting for the bus to school. None of them knew they were living in the same city as someone who was systematically defrauding charitable organizations. None of them knew that in less than 24 hours, I was going to confront a professional criminal who happened to be carrying my grandchild. My phone buzzed with another text from Michael. "Dad, Jessica's so excited about Friday dinner. She has some wonderful news to share about the foundation work she's been doing." "I'll bet she does," I thought grimly. "I'll bet she does. What do you think about all this so far? Am I taking the right approach, or would you handle this situation differently? Let me know in the comments below." Thursday morning arrived grey and drizzling, typical Pacific Northwest weather that matched my mood perfectly. Dorothy found me in the kitchen at 5:30, already dressed and nursing my second cup of coffee, while staring at the folder of evidence that had grown considerably thicker overnight. "You look like a man preparing for war," she said, settling beside me with her own coffee. "I feel like a man preparing to save his family from a predator." The accountant's preliminary report had arrived via email at midnight. Patricia had forwarded it immediately, despite the late hour. The numbers were staggering and sickening. Over the past 18 months, the Bright Futures Foundation had lost approximately $73,000 to what the accountant euphemistically called unaccounted disbursements and administrative irregularities. $73,000, money donated by hard-working families to help children learn to read. Money that should have bought books, funded after-school programs, paid for reading specialists in underserved schools. Instead, it had disappeared into Jessica's personal accounts, funding her lifestyle while she played the role of dedicated volunteer. But the foundation was just the beginning. My phone calls to other nonprofit directors in Portland had revealed a pattern of suspicious activity wherever Jessica had been involved. Grant applications submitted without organizational knowledge, donor information collected and shared inappropriately, financial records accessed by someone without proper authorization. She was running multiple cons simultaneously, using her pregnancy and her marriage to my son as shields against scrutiny. Who would suspect a pregnant woman involved in charity work? Who would question the daughter-in-law of John Doe, respected businessman and community pillar? "When are you going to confront her?" Dorothy asked. "This afternoon, before she has a chance to prepare for tomorrow's dinner, before she can spin whatever story she's planning to tell us about her foundation work." "Where?" "Her apartment. Michael will be at work until 6. It'll just be the two of us." Dorothy studied my face. "And if she denies everything?" I gestured toward the folder. "She can deny whatever she wants. The evidence speaks for itself." "John." Dorothy's voice carried a warning. "This woman is dangerous. She's been lying to everyone for years, stealing money, manipulating people. Don't underestimate her." "I'm not underestimating anything, but I'm not going to let her destroy our family either." At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I knocked on the door of Michael and Jessica's apartment in the Pearl District. They'd moved there 6 months after the wedding, into a modern complex with high ceilings, stainless steel appliances, and rent that cost more than my first mortgage payment. I'd wondered at the time how they could afford it on Michael's programmer salary and Jessica's volunteer work. Now I knew. Jessica answered the door, wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater that emphasized her growing belly. At 5 months pregnant, she had that healthy glow that made people automatically protective and sympathetic. The perfect cover for a criminal. "John, what a nice surprise." Her smile was bright and welcoming, but I caught a flicker of wariness in her eyes. "Michael's not home yet." "I came to see you, actually." "We need to talk." The wariness sharpened. "Of course, come in. Can I get you some tea? Coffee?" "This isn't a social visit, Jessica. I followed her into their living room, noting details I'd previously ignored. The expensive artwork on the walls, the designer furniture, the electronics, that seemed far beyond what a young couple should be able to afford. Everything paid for with stolen money. "John, you're making me nervous." Jessica settled into a chair positioned to maximize her pregnant profile. "Is something wrong? Is Dorothy okay?" "Dorothy's fine, but the Bright Futures Foundation isn't." The change in her expression was subtle but unmistakable. The practiced warmth disappeared, replaced by something calculating and cold. This was the real Jessica, the one who had systematically defrauded charitable organizations across 2 states. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "I think you understand perfectly." I opened my folder and placed the accountant's report on their coffee table. $73,000, Jessica. That's how much money has gone missing from the foundation since you became involved. She glanced at the document, then back at my face. "John, I volunteer with the foundation, but I don't handle money. I help with events and donor relations. You've been altering financial records, forging receipts, and submitting false grant applications using the foundation's credentials." "That's impossible. I would never." "I have copies of the documents you altered. I have records of the grant applications you submitted without authorization. I have evidence of every lie you've told and every dollar you've stolen." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, her hands moving unconsciously to her belly in a gesture that looked protective but struck me as manipulative. When she looked up, her expression had shifted again, this time to wounded innocence. "John, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Yes, I've helped with some administrative work, but if there are problems with foundation finances, I had no idea. Maybe someone else has been using my volunteer access inappropriately." The audacity was breathtaking. Faced with overwhelming evidence, she was trying to position herself as another victim. "Jessica, I know about California. I know about the other organizations you've been involved with. I know this isn't your first time stealing from charities." For the first time, fear flickered across her features. Real fear, not the performed anxiety she'd been displaying. "You've been investigating me. I've been protecting my family and trying to understand how someone I welcomed into my home could systematically steal money meant for children's literacy programs." She stood up abruptly and walked to the window overlooking the Willamette River. When she turned back, the masks were gone entirely. This was Jessica without pretense, without performance, without the carefully constructed persona she'd worn for 3 years. "How much do you know?" "Everything. The question is what you're going to do about it." "What I'm going to do?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "John, I think you're confused about who has leverage in this situation. I have evidence of federal crimes, Jessica. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement. You're looking at decades in federal prison, and you're looking at destroying your son's marriage and traumatizing your pregnant daughter-in-law." Her voice was steady, professional. "Tell me, John, what do you think happens to Michael when he discovers his father had his wife arrested? What happens to your relationship with your grandchild?" The threat was implicit but clear. Expose her, and she would ensure maximum collateral damage to my family. She had been planning for this confrontation, preparing her defenses not just legally, but emotionally. "I'm going to give you one chance," I said quietly. "Return the money, all of it. Make arrangements to pay back every organization you've defrauded. Leave Portland and leave my family alone. And if I refuse, then I take everything I know to the FBI and let them sort it out." Jessica smiled, and for the first time, I understood why Dorothy had called her dangerous. There was something cold and predatory in that expression, something that had been hidden beneath months of careful performance. "John, you're a good man. That's your weakness and my strength. You care more about protecting Michael than you do about abstract justice. I'm betting you'll choose family loyalty over moral outrage. You're betting wrong, am I? Because I think if you really cared about evidence and justice, you would have called the police already. Instead, you're here, alone, trying to negotiate a private solution. That tells me you're not prepared to destroy your family, to punish me. She was right, and we both knew it. I had come here hoping for confession, remorse, some indication that the woman Michael loved was still salvageable. Instead, I was facing a career criminal who had studied my psychology as carefully as she'd studied non-profit financial systems. Jessica, this is your last chance. Make this right or I will. I'm pregnant with your grandchild, John. I'm married to your son. I'm not going anywhere. She moved closer, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. And if you try to destroy me, I'll make sure everyone knows that you investigated your own family, that you chose strangers over your son's happiness, that you care more about money than blood. I looked at this woman who had been sitting at my dinner table for 2 years, who had smiled and laughed and pretended to care about our family while systematically stealing from children's charities. The mother of my grandchild, my son's wife. A professional predator who had identified our family's weaknesses and exploited them with surgical precision. We'll see about that, I said, and walked toward the door. John. Her voice stopped me at the threshold. Tomorrow's dinner is still on. Michael's excited to share our news with you and Dorothy. I hope you'll be able to enjoy the evening. The dismissal was clear. She had thrown down her gauntlet, dared me to choose between justice and family peace. She was confident in her position, certain that my love for Michael would paralyze my ability to act against her. She was about to learn that 40 years of building honest businesses had taught me something about strategy, and that underestimating John Doe was the biggest mistake she'd made yet. Thank you for staying with me through this difficult part of the story. I promise you the best is yet to come. Jessica has no idea what she's unleashed. That evening, Dorothy and I sat in our living room like generals planning a military campaign. The coffee table was covered with documents, phone numbers, and a yellow legal pad where I'd been mapping out what Dorothy had started calling Operation Grandchild Protection. She called your bluff, Dorothy said, reviewing my account of the confrontation. She doesn't think you'll follow through. She's wrong, I said, looking at the evidence spread across our coffee table. But she's also strategic. She knows exactly what she's doing. Dorothy poured herself another cup of tea, her movements precise and controlled. After 31 years of marriage, I recognize this as her thinking mode. What did you learn about her psychology today? She's not just a thief, Dorothy. She's a predator. Everything about our relationship with her has been calculated. The way she met Michael, the speed of their engagement, even getting pregnant. It's all been part of a long-term strategy. And now she's betting that your love for Michael will override your sense of justice. I walked to our front window, looking out at the neighborhood where we'd raised our son, where we'd built a life based on honesty and community service. Mrs. Patterson was putting out her recycling, the same routine she'd followed for 8 years. Normal life, continuing while our family faced the biggest crisis we'd ever encountered. There's something else, I said finally. When I was leaving, she mentioned that tomorrow's dinner was still on, that Michael was excited to share their news. What news? I think she's planning to announce something that will make it even harder for us to expose her. Maybe they're moving away. Maybe she's planning some kind of medical emergency that requires our support. Whatever it is, she's setting up her next manipulation. Dorothy joined me at the window. Or maybe she's planning to tell Michael that his father has been investigating his wife, and she's the victim of harassment by a bitter old man who can't accept that his son has moved on. The possibility hit me like ice water. Jessica was absolutely capable of flipping the script, making herself the victim and me the villain. If she got to Michael first, if she framed my investigation as obsessive persecution, I need to call. Patricia Wells, I said, reaching for my phone. We need to move faster, Patricia answered on the second ring. John, I was just about to call you. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Someone contacted the Oregonian. There's a reporter asking questions about irregularities at the foundation, specifically asking about Jessica's involvement. My blood ran cold. Did you talk to them? I didn't, but Linda Morrison did. She thought she was helping by explaining that we were conducting an internal audit. She mentioned your concerns about Jessica. The room seemed to tilt around me. Patricia, please tell me you're not saying what I think you're saying. I'm saying that, as of this afternoon, Jessica probably knows that word is spreading beyond our small circle. If she sees tomorrow's paper, I hung up and immediately called the Oregonian. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached the reporter who'd been making inquiries. Janet Miller, investigative journalism, 20 years of experience. Asking uncomfortable questions. Mr. Doe, I'm glad you called. I've been trying to reach you about allegations regarding the Bright Futures Foundation. Are you prepared to comment on your daughter-in-law's alleged involvement in financial irregularities? No comment at this time. Mr. Doe, I have statements from multiple sources indicating that Jessica Doe has been involved in suspicious financial activities with several non-profit organizations. Given your family relationship, don't you think the public deserves transparency? I said no comment. The story runs tomorrow morning, with or without your input. Might be better to get ahead of it. I hung up and turned to Dorothy, who had been listening to my side of the conversation with growing alarm. How long do we have? She asked. The story runs tomorrow morning. Jessica will see it, Michael will see it, and our chance to handle this privately will be gone forever. Then we handle it tonight. I stared at my wife of 31 years, seeing the steel beneath her gentle exterior. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop letting Jessica control the narrative. We call Michael now, we tell him everything, and we let him decide what to do with the information. Dorothy, this will destroy him. Jessica will destroy him. We're trying to save him. She was right, and I knew it, but the thought of making that phone call, of hearing my son's world collapse in real time, made me feel sick. There's another option, I said slowly. I'm listening. We go to dinner tomorrow night. We let Jessica make whatever announcement she's planning, and then we make our own announcement. Dorothy studied my face. That's incredibly risky, John. If she's prepared for confrontation, then she'll get one. But it'll be on my terms, with my evidence in front of Michael, so she can't spin the story later. And if Michael takes her side, the question I'd been avoiding all week. What if my son, faced with choosing between his pregnant wife and his father's accusations, chose to protect Jessica? What if love and loyalty trumped evidence and truth? Then at least he'll know the truth, even if he doesn't believe it immediately. Dorothy was quiet for several minutes, weighing options that all carried devastating consequences. Finally, she nodded. What do you need me to do? I spent the next 3 hours organizing every piece of evidence into a presentation that would be impossible to deny or dismiss. Bank records, altered documents, email trails, witness statements from other non-profit directors. Everything laid out chronologically to show the pattern of Jessica's criminal behavior. At 10 o'clock, I called Michael. Dad. Great timing. I was just telling Jessica how excited I am about tomorrow night. She has the most amazing news about her work with the foundation. I'm sure she does, son. We'll see you at 7. Dad, you sound strange. Is everything okay? I looked at Dorothy, who nodded encouragingly. Everything's fine, Michael. We'll talk tomorrow night. Okay. Love you, Dad. Love you too, son. After I hung up, Dorothy and I sat in our living room, surrounded by evidence of our daughter-in-law's crimes, preparing for what might be the last normal evening our family would ever have. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" I asked. "I think we're doing the only thing," Dorothy replied. "Jessica made this choice when she decided to steal money from children's literacy programs. We're just making sure there are consequences." That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about Michael as a little boy, how he'd trusted me to protect him from bullies at school, from nightmares, from anything that might hurt him. Tomorrow night, I was going to hurt him worse than anyone ever had. But I was also going to protect him from something infinitely worse. At 6 a.m., I got up and checked the Oregonian website. The story was there, front page of the local section, local non-profit faces fraud investigation. Jessica's name was mentioned prominently, along with mine as a concerned family member who had brought irregularities to light. My phone started ringing at 6:15. Michael calling from what sounded like his car. "Dad, what the hell is this article about Jessica? Are you the family member they quoted?" "Michael, come over. Bring Jessica. We need to talk." "Dad, this article makes it sound like Jessica is some kind of criminal. You know that's impossible, right?" I closed my eyes, hearing the pain and confusion in my son's voice. "Just come over, son, please. We'll be there in 20 minutes. I woke Dorothy and showed her the article. She read it quickly, then looked at me with grim determination. "Well," she said, "I guess dinner got moved up to breakfast. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about family, justice, and the power of a grandfather's love." 20 minutes later, they were at our door. Michael's face was a study in confusion and betrayal when I opened the front door. Behind him, Jessica stood with her hand protectively over her belly, her expression carefully composed into wounded innocence. She'd had 20 minutes to prepare her performance, and she was ready. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Michael pushed, passed me into our living room, then stopped short when he saw the documents spread across every surface. "What is all this?" "This is evidence," I said quietly. "Evidence of crimes your wife has been committing for the past 2 years. Jessica moved to Michael's side, her voice trembling with what sounded like fear. "John, I can't believe you're doing this. After I trusted you, after I came to you for help understanding the Foundation's problems." The lie was so audacious, so perfectly delivered, that for a moment I almost doubted my own memory of yesterday's confrontation. This was a master manipulator at work. "Jessica, enough," Dorothy said sharply. "We know what you've been doing. The question is whether you're going to keep lying or finally tell Michael the truth." Michael looked between his wife and his parents, his confusion deepening. "Will someone please explain what's happening? The newspaper article made it sound like Jessica's been stealing money, which is obviously insane." I handed him the accountant's report. $73,000 missing from the Bright Futures Foundation. All of it disappeared after Jessica became involved in their financial processes. Michael scanned the document, his face growing pale. "This has to be a mistake. Jessica volunteers there. She doesn't handle money." "Actually, she does." I showed him copies of the altered bank records, the forged receipts, the false grant applications. "She's been systematically defrauding the Foundation and using the money to fund your lifestyle." "That's impossible," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was looking at Jessica with growing uncertainty. Jessica sat down heavily on a couch, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "Michael, I think your father is having some kind of breakdown. These accusations are insane. I would never steal money, especially not from a children's charity." "Then explain this." I placed a bank statement in front of her, one that showed a deposit of $15,000 to her personal account on the same day the Foundation reported a $15,000 administrative error in their quarterly report. The tears stopped abruptly. Jessica looked at the bank statement, then at Michael, then back at me. I could see her calculating, trying to determine if the situation was salvageable or if it was time to cut her losses. "Michael," she said finally, her voice taking on a different tone. There are things about my past that I haven't told you, things I'm not proud of. What things? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. I made some mistakes when I was younger. Financial mistakes. I got involved with the wrong people, made some bad decisions about money. She was partially confessing, trying to control the narrative by admitting to lesser crimes while maintaining her victim status. It was a sophisticated damage control strategy. What kind of mistakes? Dorothy asked. I helped someone else steal money from a charity in California. I was young, I was in love, I thought I was just helping with bookkeeping. When everything fell apart, I had to leave the state. Michael was staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. You stole money. I was manipulated, Michael, used by someone who said he loved me. When I moved to Oregon, I swore I'd never get involved in anything like that again. But you did, I said quietly. You've been stealing from the Bright Futures Foundation for 18 months. No. The force of her denial surprised everyone. I've been trying to fix problems I discovered in their bookkeeping. Problems that reminded me of what I went through in California. I've been trying to trace missing funds, not steal them. The audacity was breathtaking. Faced with overwhelming evidence, she was now claiming to be investigating the very crimes she'd committed. Jessica, Dorothy said, her voice tight with controlled anger. We have copies of documents you altered. We have records of false grant applications you submitted. We have witness statements from other organizations where you've been involved in financial irregularities. I was trying to help those organizations recover missing funds, Jessica insisted, just like I was trying to help the foundation. If there are irregularities in my methods, it's because I was desperate to prevent other charities from going through what I experienced in California. Michael looked lost, torn between evidence and emotion. Dad, is it possible that Jessica was trying to help and just went about it the wrong way? I felt my heart break for my son. Even faced with clear evidence of criminal behavior, he was looking for a way to believe in the woman he loved. Michael, your wife has stolen $73,000 from children's literacy programs. She's forged federal documents, committed mail fraud, and lied to your face for 2 years. There's no innocent explanation for any of this. But she's pregnant with our baby, Michael said desperately. She's carrying your grandchild. People don't do things like this when they're starting a family. Jessica reached for Michael's hand, her tears flowing again. Michael, I'm so sorry you're being put through this. I know how much you love your father, and I know how hard this must be for you. She was positioning the conflict as between Michael and me rather than between truth and lies, making him choose sides rather than face facts. There's something else, I said, pulling out the research I'd done on Jessica's history in California. This isn't her first time using pregnancy to avoid consequences for fraud. I showed Michael the court records I'd found online. Jessica Martinez had been pregnant during her previous investigation, had claimed emotional distress, and received a plea deal that avoided jail time in exchange for restitution and leaving the state. She's done this before, Michael. Used pregnancy as a shield while stealing money from charities. Michael was staring at the court documents, his face cycling through disbelief, horror, and something that looked like grief. Jessica, is this true? For the first time since entering our house, Jessica dropped her mask completely. The tears stopped, the wounded expression disappeared, and what remained was cold calculation. Michael, your father has spent weeks investigating me like I'm some kind of criminal. He's violated our privacy, contacted my former colleagues, and now he's trying to destroy our marriage with lies and half-truths. These aren't lies, I said firmly. These are court records, financial statements, witness testimonies, evidence of systematic criminal behavior, evidence gathered by a man who clearly resents his daughter-in-law and wants to control his son's life, Jessica shot back. Michael, can't you see what's happening here? Your father can't accept that you've moved on, that you have a wife and a baby on the way. He's using these accusations to try to break us up." The room fell silent except for the sound of Michael's labored breathing. He was looking back and forth between Jessica and me, a man caught between two versions of reality. They couldn't both be true. "Michael," I said gently, "I know this is hard, but you have to look at the evidence. You have to see what's really been happening." "What I see," Michael said finally, his voice shaking, "is my father trying to destroy my pregnant wife with accusations that could send her to prison. What I see is a man who's supposed to love our family tearing it apart instead." My heart sank. Jessica had won this round, using Michael's love and loyalty against the evidence of her crimes. "Son, please, no, Dad, I've heard enough." Michael stood up, helping Jessica to her feet. "I don't know what's happened to you, but this isn't the man who raised me. The father I knew would never try to destroy his son's happiness like this." They walked toward the door, Jessica leaning heavily on Michael's arm, playing the role of traumatized victim to perfection. "Michael," Dorothy called after them, "what about the money? What about the foundation?" "I'll make sure any financial problems are resolved," Michael said without turning around, "but I won't let you destroy my family with these lies." The door closed behind them, leaving Dorothy and me alone with a room full of evidence that our son refused to see. "What do we do now?" Dorothy asked. I looked at the documents scattered across our living room, proof of crimes that would send Jessica to federal prison for decades, evidence that my son had just dismissed as lies because the truth was too painful to accept. "Now," I said quietly, "we prepare for tonight's dinner, because this isn't over, not even close." The rest of Friday passed in a strange, suspended tension. Michael called twice to cancel dinner, but each time I talked him into keeping the plans. I knew Jessica would want the evening to proceed. It was her chance to solidify her victory, to demonstrate her control over Michael while showing Dorothy and me exactly how powerless we'd become. What she didn't know was that I'd spent the afternoon making phone calls that would change everything. At 3 o'clock, I'd called Special Agent Patricia Hendricks with the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. I'd met her 2 years earlier when she'd spoken at a Chamber of Commerce event about business fraud prevention. She remembered me, and she was very interested in the evidence I'd collected. "Mr. Doe, from what you're describing, this appears to be systematic non-profit fraud across state lines. That puts it squarely in federal jurisdiction." Agent Hendricks had reviewed the documents I'd emailed and was scheduled to visit our house at 8 o'clock that evening. "Agent Hendricks, I need you to understand something. My son is defending his wife. He doesn't believe the evidence." "Mr. Doe, that's not uncommon in these cases. Family members often refuse to accept that someone they love is capable of serious crimes. But the evidence speaks for itself, regardless of family dynamics." At 5 o'clock, I'd called Patricia Wells to coordinate our final strategy. "John, the board met this afternoon. We're filing formal charges Monday morning, regardless of any family considerations. The foundation has a legal obligation to its donors and to the children we serve." "I understand." "And Patricia, tonight might get complicated." "How complicated?" "Let's just say that by tomorrow morning, Jessica will either be in federal custody or on her way out of the state." At 6:30, Michael and Jessica arrived for dinner. Jessica was wearing a flowing dress that emphasized her pregnancy, her makeup, carefully applied to suggest both beauty and vulnerability. She'd prepared for this evening like an actress, preparing for the performance of her life. Michael looked exhausted, like a man who'd spent the day trying to reconcile evidence with emotion and failing at both. He kissed Dorothy's cheek and hugged me stiffly, going through the motions of family affection while clearly struggling with the morning's confrontation. "Thank you for having us," Jessica said, settling into the chair that gave her the best view of both the front door and the kitchen. "I know today was difficult for everyone." Dorothy had prepared Jessica's favorite meal: rosemary chicken with roasted vegetables, homemade bread, apple pie for dessert. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a lovely family evening. Tonight, it felt like the Last Supper. "So," I said as we sat down to eat, "Michael mentioned you had news to share." Jessica smiled, her hand moving to her belly in that protective gesture that had become her signature manipulation. "Actually, we have wonderful news. Michael got a promotion at work." Michael looked surprised. "Jessica, I told you that's not official yet, but it will be," she said confidently. "And with the new salary, we've decided it's time to buy a house. Somewhere with good schools, a yard for the baby, maybe closer to my family in California." The implication was clear. They were planning to leave Portland, to move beyond the reach of the Foundation investigation and my evidence. A fresh start in a new state, probably with new identities and new targets for Jessica's criminal activities. "That's quite a coincidence," Dorothy said carefully, "deciding to move just as the Foundation is dealing with its financial problems." "What Foundation problems?" Jessica's expression was perfectly innocent. "I thought John's investigation had cleared up that misunderstanding." The gaslighting was masterful. She was rewriting yesterday's events, suggesting that my evidence had somehow vindicated her rather than exposing her crimes. "Jessica," I said quietly, "we both know what really happened with the Foundation money." "John, please." Michael's voice carried a warning. "We talked about this. You agreed to drop these accusations." "Actually, I didn't agree to anything." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jessica's smile faltered slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. "Dad, you promised you'd let this go if I agreed to dinner tonight." "No, Michael, you told me you'd make sure any financial problems were resolved, but the problems haven't been resolved, and Jessica hasn't returned a single dollar she stole." "I didn't steal anything," Jessica said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. $73,000 from the Bright Futures Foundation, $15,000 from the Community Center's Homeless Services Program, $8,000 from the Literacy Coalition's Summer Reading Initiative. I pulled out a new document, one I'd prepared that afternoon. "Should I continue?" Michael was staring at the numbers, his face growing pale. "What is this?" "It's a complete accounting of every dollar your wife has stolen from charitable organizations in Portland. Organizations that help children, Michael. Organizations that depend on community trust and support." "This is harassment," Jessica said, standing up from the table. "Michael, we should leave." "Sit down, Jessica." My voice carried an authority that surprised everyone, including myself. "We're not finished. Actually, we are." She grabbed her purse from the counter. "I don't have to listen to these lies anymore. But you do have to listen to this." I pulled out my phone and hit play on the recording I'd made of our Thursday afternoon confrontation. Jessica's voice filled the dining room. "I'm pregnant with your grandchild, John. I'm married to your son. I'm not going anywhere. And if you try to destroy me, I'll make sure everyone knows that you investigated your own family, that you chose strangers over your son's happiness, that you care more about money than blood." Michael's fork clattered onto his plate. "What is that?" "That's your wife threatening me yesterday when I confronted her with evidence of her crimes." Jessica's mask slipped completely. "You recorded our private conversation?" "I documented a criminal threatening a witness. There's a difference." The recording continued, playing Jessica's admission that she had no intention of returning the stolen money, her threats to manipulate Michael against me, her cold calculation about using her pregnancy as protection from consequences. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Michael was staring at Jessica like he'd never seen her before. "You really did it," he said finally. "You really stole money from children's charities." Michael, you have to understand. I understand that everything you've told me for 2 years has been a lie. Jessica's composure cracked completely. Fine. Yes, I took money from the foundation. Yes, I've taken money from other organizations. But not for myself, Michael. For us, for our baby, for our future. You stole money to buy us things we didn't need, with money that should have gone to children who couldn't read. I did what I had to do to give our family a good life. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock. I stood up from the table looking at Jessica's panicked face. That'll be the FBI, I said calmly. They're here to arrest you for federal crimes. Jessica lunged for the back door, but Dorothy was already there, blocking her exit with surprising determination for a woman who usually avoided confrontation. Michael, Jessica pleaded, don't let them do this to me. Don't let them destroy our family. Michael was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. You destroyed our family the moment you stole that first $1. I opened the front door to find Agent Hendricks and 2 other federal agents, all wearing bulletproof vests and serious expressions. Mr. Doe, is Mrs. Jessica Doe present? She's in the dining room. The arrest was swift and professional. Jessica was read her rights, handcuffed and escorted to a waiting car, while Michael watched his world collapse in real time. She didn't speak during the process, but her eyes found mine as she was led past the front door. The look she gave me was pure hatred, the expression of a predator who'd finally met someone capable of fighting back. After the agents left, Michael sat at our dining table and cried for 20 minutes straight. Dorothy held him like he was 8 years old again, while I called our family attorney to begin the process of protecting Michael from any legal liability for Jessica's crimes. Dad, Michael said finally, his voice hoarse from crying. I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have seen what she really was. Son, she's a professional con artist. She's been fooling people for years. Don't blame yourself for being deceived by someone who made deception her life's work. But the baby. Jessica was 5 months pregnant with what might be my grandchild, now sitting in federal custody, facing decades in prison. The human consequences of justice were never simple. We'll figure out the baby situation when we know more about Jessica's legal status, I said. Right now, you need to focus on protecting yourself and moving forward. That night, Michael slept in his old bedroom for the first time in 3 years. Dorothy and I lay awake talking about the day's events, processing the mixture of relief and grief that came with doing the right thing at enormous personal cost. Do you think we handled this correctly? Dorothy asked. I think we saved our family from a predator who would have destroyed us all eventually. And Michael will heal. It'll take time, but he's strong, and he's surrounded by people who actually love him. Through our bedroom window, I could see the lights of Portland spread out below us, a city full of charitable organizations working to help children and families in need. Organizations that were a little bit safer tonight, because Jessica Martinez was in federal custody. It had been the hardest day of my life as a father, but it had also been the most important. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, media attention, legal proceedings, the complex question of what to do about a baby whose mother was a federal criminal. But tonight, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Justice, it turned out, was better than any sleeping pill. 3 weeks later, Michael was sitting across from me at Powell's Books Cafe, the same place where he'd told me about meeting Jessica 4 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. He looked older, tired, but somehow cleaner, like a man who'd been sick for a long time and was finally beginning to recover. The DNA test results came back, he said quietly, sliding a manila envelope across the small table. I'd been dreading this moment while simultaneously needing to know the truth. Was the baby Jessica was carrying actually Michael's child, or was this pregnancy just another layer of her elaborate con? Do you want to tell me, or should I read it myself? The baby is mine, Michael said, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and pain. 99.7% probability. I'm going to be a father to the child of a federal criminal. The weight of that statement settled between us like a physical presence. Jessica was currently being held without bail at the Federal Detention Center, facing charges that could send her to prison for 25 years. The baby was due in 4 months, which meant it would be born in federal custody. How do you feel about that? I asked. Michael stared into his coffee cup, gathering his thoughts. Terrified, relieved, guilty, angry, sometimes all at the same time. That sounds about right. Dad, what kind of mother steals money from children's literacy programs while she's pregnant? What kind of person does that? It was a question that had haunted me for 3 weeks. How do you explain evil to someone who's been intimately connected to it? How do you help your son understand that he'd been married to a sociopath? The kind of person who sees other people as tools to be used rather than human beings to be loved, I said finally. Jessica never loved you, Michael. She loved what you could provide for her: legitimacy, cover, access to charitable organizations, through our family connections. The whole marriage was fake. The marriage was real to you. Your love was real. Your commitment was real. Your excitement about becoming a father was real. Don't let her lies diminish what was genuine about your feelings. Michael nodded slowly. The federal prosecutor wants to meet with me next week. They think Jessica might try to claim that I was involved in the fraud somehow. This was what I'd been afraid of. Jessica was facing decades in prison and desperate. Criminals often tried to spread blame to reduce their own sentences. Did you know anything about her financial activities? Nothing. I thought she was volunteering her time, maybe helping with basic administrative work. I never questioned where the money came from for our apartment, our furniture, our lifestyle. Michael paused. I should have questioned it, shouldn't I? Michael, you trusted your wife. That's what married people do. Don't blame yourself for not being suspicious enough. But I was living off stolen money, Dad. Every dinner out, every piece of furniture in our apartment, even the baby clothes we'd already bought, all of it paid for with money stolen from children's charities. The guilt in his voice was devastating. My son was torturing himself over crimes he'd never committed, carrying responsibility for actions he'd never taken. The prosecutor knows you weren't involved, I said firmly. I made sure of that. I provided them with evidence that Jessica kept. You completely isolated from her criminal activities. You're a victim here, not a perpetrator. Then why do I feel so guilty? Because you're a good person who's horrified to discover you were unknowingly connected to something evil. That guilt is proof of your character, not evidence of your complicity. We sat in silence for several minutes, watching other customers browse books and drink coffee, living normal lives that didn't include federal investigations and pregnant criminals, and the complex ethics of loving a child whose mother was a sociopath. I want to see her, Michael said suddenly. Jessica, I need to understand how someone can do what she did. I need to hear her explain it. Michael, that's not a good idea. She's going to try to manipulate you, to convince you that somehow this is all my fault or the system's fault or anyone's fault except hers. I know. But I need closure. I need to look her in the eye and hear her admit what she really is. Against my better judgment, I understood. Michael needed to say goodbye, not just to Jessica, but to the version of his life he'd thought he was living. He needed to see the predator without the mask. If you're determined to do this, I want to come with you. Dad, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Jessica is dangerous, even in federal custody. She'll be looking for any psychological advantage. She can find any way to get inside your head and plant doubt about what really happened. You think she'll try to win me back? I think she'll try to convince you that somehow we can still be a family. That if you just support her through the legal process, if you just believe her version of events, everything can go back to normal. Michael considered this, and you'll be there to remind me that normal was a lie. I'll be there to remind you who you really are and what you really deserve. The federal detention center was a concrete fortress designed to contain people who'd committed serious crimes against society. Visiting Jessica there felt surreal. This sterile, institutional environment housing the woman who'd shared Michael's bed for 2 years, who'd sat at our dinner table, who'd played the role of beloved daughter-in-law while systematically stealing. From children's charities, Jessica looked different in her orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back without makeup or styling. But what struck me most was her eyes. Gone was any pretense of vulnerability or innocence. What remained was calculation, even here in federal custody. "Michael," she said, reaching across the table as far as the shackles around her wrists would allow. "I'm so glad you came. I've been hoping you'd visit." "I came to say goodbye," Michael said quietly. Jessica's expression shifted, becoming softer, more pleading. "Goodbye? Michael, we're having a baby together. We're married. This is just a temporary setback." "Temporary?" "Jessica, you're facing 25 years in federal prison for fraud. How is that temporary? My lawyers think they can work out a plea deal. Maybe 5 years, maybe less with good behavior. You could wait for me, Michael. You could raise our baby and wait for me to come home." The audacity was breathtaking. Even facing decades in prison, she was still trying to manipulate my son into supporting her. "Jessica," I said quietly, "Michael doesn't owe you anything. You lied to him for 2 years, stole money while pregnant with his child, and threatened to destroy our family when you were caught. John, you destroyed our family when you decided to investigate me instead of trusting me. I saved our family from a predator." Jessica turned back to Michael, ignoring me entirely. "Michael, your father turned you against me. He poisoned your mind with lies and half-truths. The person you fell in love with is still here. The mother of your child is still here." Michael stared at her across the metal table, studying her face like he was seeing it for the first time. "The person I fell in love with never existed," he said finally. "You created a character, Jessica. You performed a role for 2 years while stealing money from children. The real you is sitting here in federal custody, still trying to manipulate me into believing your lies." For the first time since I'd known her, Jessica looked genuinely shocked. She'd expected Michael to be vulnerable, ready to be swayed by emotional appeals and promises of redemption. "I love you," she said desperately. "Everything I did for us." "No." Michael stood up. "Everything you did for yourself. You used me, you used my family, and you used organizations dedicated to helping children. You're not the victim here, Jessica. You're the predator." As we walked toward the exit, Jessica called after us, "Michael, you'll change your mind when the baby is born. You'll want your child to have a mother." Michael paused at the door, then turned back to face her one last time. "My child will have a father who tells the truth," he said. "That's more than you ever gave anyone." In the parking lot outside the detention center, Michael cried for the second time since Jessica's arrest. But these weren't tears of grief or loss. They were tears of relief, the emotional release that comes with finally accepting reality. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Free," he said. "For the first time in 4 years, I feel completely free." "And the baby?" Michael looked back at the detention center, where his pregnant wife was beginning what would likely be decades in federal prison. "The baby deserves better than what Jessica can provide," Michael said quietly. I'm going to file for full custody and raise this child with the values you and Mom taught me. Truth, honesty, compassion for others. We drove home in comfortable silence, both of us processing the finality of what had just happened. Jessica's mask had finally slipped completely. Even she couldn't maintain the pretense anymore. Michael had seen her for what she truly was, a predator who viewed other people as resources to be exploited. That evening, Dorothy, Michael, and I sat around our kitchen table making plans for the future. Not the future we'd expected 6 months ago, but the future we were going to build from the wreckage of Jessica's lies. The baby will need a nursery, Dorothy said practically. We can convert the guest room upstairs. Mom, I can't ask you and Dad to— You're not asking, I interrupted. We're offering. This is our grandchild we're talking about, regardless of who the mother is. What about Jessica? She'll have parental rights, even from prison. My lawyer thinks we can build a strong case for termination of parental rights, I said. Criminal behavior that demonstrates unfitness as a parent, inability to provide care. Due to incarceration, pattern of deception and manipulation. It's not guaranteed, but it's possible. Michael nodded slowly. I want to adopt the baby officially. I want to be the only legal parent if possible. We'll fight for that, Dorothy said firmly. Whatever it takes. The phone rang, interrupting our planning session. I answered to find Agent Hendricks on the other end. Mr. Doe, I wanted to update you on Mrs. Doe's case. She's agreed to plead guilty to federal fraud charges in exchange for cooperation with our investigation into her previous activities. What kind of cooperation? She's providing information about other individuals who may have been involved in non-profit fraud schemes, both here and in California. Her cooperation could help us recover additional stolen funds and prevent future crimes. I felt conflicted about this development. Part of me was glad that Jessica's information might help other victims, but another part worried about what kind of deal she might be negotiating. What does this mean for her sentence? Probably 15 to 20 years instead of 25 to 30. Still substantial time, but cooperation has value in federal court. After I hung up, I shared the information with Michael and Dorothy. So she might get out when the baby is 15 or 20 years old, Michael said. Michael, a lot can happen in 15 years, Dorothy pointed out. You could remarry, the child could be adopted by a stepmother, Jessica could lose parental rights. Entirely. Don't borrow trouble from a future that might never come. She was right, of course. We were dealing with immediate challenges, not hypothetical problems that might arise decades in the future. There's something else we need to discuss, I said carefully. The media attention. The story of Jessica's arrest had made national news. Pregnant woman arrested in non-profit fraud scheme had been picked up by CNN, Fox News, and every major newspaper in the country. Our family had become a symbol of how criminal predators could infiltrate charitable organizations and exploit community trust. I've had 3 interview requests today, Michael said. 60 Minutes, Dateline, and some documentary filmmaker who wants to tell our story. What do you want to do? I want to help prevent this from happening to other families, Michael said, without hesitation. If telling our story can help people recognize the warning signs of non-profit fraud, if it can help protect other charitable organizations, then I think we have an obligation to speak out. I was proud of my son in that moment. Despite everything he'd been through, his first instinct was to help others avoid the same pain. Then we'll do interviews together, I said. We'll tell the complete story, from beginning to end. What about Jessica? Won't this make things harder for her? Jessica made her own choices, Dorothy said firmly. The consequences of those choices aren't our responsibility. Over the next several weeks, we did tell our story. We sat for interviews with federal investigators, journalists, and documentary filmmakers. We spoke at conferences about non-profit security and fraud prevention. We became reluctant experts on how criminal predators infiltrate charitable organizations. The response was overwhelming. We heard from hundreds of families who'd experienced similar situations, from non-profit directors who'd implemented new security measures based on our story, from law enforcement agencies who used our case as a training example. But the most meaningful response came from the Bright Futures Foundation itself. Patricia Wells called 6 weeks after Jessica's arrest with news that brought tears to my eyes. "John, you need to know something. The publicity from Jessica's case has brought in more donations than we've ever received. People are so angry about what she did to children's literacy programs that they're opening their wallets to make sure we can continue our work." How much? Over $200,000 in 6 weeks. We're going to be able to expand our programs, hire additional staff, and serve twice as many children as we did before Jessica's crimes. I sat down heavily in my office chair, overwhelmed by the irony. Jessica's attempt to steal from children had ultimately resulted in those same children receiving more help than ever before. "Patricia, there's something I want to do with my families. A portion of any recovered funds." "What do you mean?" "Whatever money gets recovered from Jessica's accounts, whatever restitution gets paid, I want our family's portion to go directly back to the foundation and the other organizations she defrauded." "John, you don't have to." "Yes, we do. We were unwitting beneficiaries of stolen money for 2 years. We lived off those funds, enjoyed comforts paid for with money stolen from children. We need to make that right." Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's incredibly generous, John. It's not generous, it's necessary. The baby was born on a cold February morning, delivered by cesarean section in the medical unit of the Federal Detention Center. Michael was allowed to be present for the birth, and I'll never forget the phone call I received from the hospital. "Dad, it's a girl. 8 pounds, 4 ounces, perfectly healthy." Michael's voice was thick with emotion. "She's beautiful." "What's her name?" "Martha. Martha Hope Doe. After Mom's mother, and because hope is what we need right now." I had to sit down. Martha had been my mother-in-law's name, a woman who'd embodied everything Jessica was not. Honesty, selflessness, genuine. Love for family. "That's perfect, son. How are you doing?" "I'm terrified and grateful and heartbroken and hopeful all at the same time." "Is that normal for someone in your situation?" "Absolutely." Jessica signed away her parental rights 3 days after Martha's birth. Her lawyer explained that maintaining parental rights from federal prison would be impossible, and that voluntary termination would look better for any future appeals. It was the first unselfish thing she'd done since I'd known her. Michael brought Martha home to our house on a sunny February afternoon. Dorothy had spent weeks preparing the nursery, and I'd baby-proofed the entire first floor. We were ready to begin again, to build a family from love instead of lies. That night, as I held my granddaughter for the first time, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been excluded from a gender reveal party by a woman who thought I was too insignificant to matter. Tonight, I was holding my granddaughter in a house filled with truth and hope. "What are you thinking about?" Dorothy asked, settling beside me on the couch. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best. Things we never expected." Martha opened her eyes then, looking up at me with the clear, innocent gaze of someone who'd never been lied to, never been manipulated, never been used as a tool for someone else's criminal purposes. "Hello, sweetheart," I whispered. "Welcome to a family that tells the truth." 6 months after Martha's birth, I found myself standing at the podium of the National Association of Non-Profit Organizations annual conference, looking out at an audience of 500 people who work daily to make the world a better place. They'd invited me to speak about fraud prevention, but what I really wanted to talk about was redemption. Ladies and gentlemen, 8 months ago, my family was the victim of systematic fraud by someone we trusted completely. Today, I want to tell you about the unexpected gift that came from that betrayal. In the audience, I could see Michael holding Martha, now a healthy, happy 6-month-old who'd never known anything but love and honesty. Dorothy sat beside them, radiant with the joy that comes from helping to raise a grandchild under circumstances where every day feels like a blessing. The woman who defrauded your organizations, who stole money from children's literacy programs, who manipulated charitable institutions for personal gain, gave us something precious in the process of destroying our lives. She gave us clarity about what really matters. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, a photo of Martha taking her first steps in our living room just last week. This is Martha Hope Doe, my granddaughter. Her mother is currently serving 18 years in federal prison for fraud. Her father is my son, a good man who was deceived by a professional criminal. Martha will grow up knowing the truth about her origins, but she'll also grow up surrounded by people who choose love over deception, truth over manipulation, community service over personal greed. The audience was completely silent, absorbed in a story that none of them had expected to hear at a conference about non-profit management. 8 months ago, I thought my role was to protect my family from external threats. I learned that sometimes the biggest threats come from within, and that protecting the people you love sometimes requires making choices that feel like betrayal. I clicked to the next slide, showing the amount of money that had been recovered and returned to defrauded organizations, $127,000, plus interest and penalties that Jessica would be paying for the rest of her life. But here's what I want you to understand. The money that was stolen from your organizations has been returned, with interest. The publicity from this case has generated more donations for children's literacy programs than these organizations had received in the previous 5 years combined. The criminal who tried to destroy charitable work has inadvertently become the catalyst for the largest expansion of non-profit services in our region's history. Spontaneous applause erupted from the audience. These were people who dedicated their careers to helping others, and they understood the irony of good emerging from evil. Now you might ask, why am I telling you this story? What's the lesson for non-profit management? I paused, looking out at faces that represented thousands of hours of volunteer work, millions of dollars in charitable giving, countless lives touched by organized compassion. The lesson is that evil contains the seeds of its own destruction, but only if good people are willing to act when action is difficult. If I had chosen family loyalty over moral obligation, if I had protected my son's feelings instead of exposing his wife's crimes, the damage would have continued indefinitely. I clicked to a slide showing statistics about non-profit fraud, numbers that represented real suffering by real people who needed charitable services. Every year, fraud costs charitable organizations approximately $40 billion nationwide. That's not just money, that's children who don't learn to read, families who don't get housing assistance, communities that don't receive disaster relief. When we fail to expose fraud in charitable organizations, we become complicit in harming the very people those organizations exist to serve. The audience was leaning forward now, fully engaged with the moral complexity of the situation I was describing. But here's the most important thing I learned from this experience. Justice and mercy are not opposites. They're partners in the work of healing. I clicked to my final slide, a photo of Jessica taken during one of our family dinners, smiling and laughing while secretly planning to steal money from children's charities. This woman destroyed my son's marriage, betrayed my family's trust, and stole money from vulnerable children. She deserves every day of the 18-year sentence she received. But she also deserves the chance to find redemption in prison, to use her skills for legitimate purposes, to become someone worthy of her daughter's eventual forgiveness. The silence in the auditorium was profound. These were people who understood both the necessity of justice and the possibility of redemption. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here to tell you how to run your organizations. You know your work better than I ever will. But I am here to tell you that when you're faced with evidence of fraud, when you discover that someone you trusted has betrayed that trust, you have an obligation that goes beyond organizational loyalty or personal comfort. I looked directly at Michael and Martha, my voice growing stronger with conviction. You have an obligation to choose truth over comfort, justice over convenience, and the welfare of the people you serve over the feelings of the people who betray that service. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. But more importantly, the conversations that followed lasted for hours. Nonprofit directors shared their own stories of suspected fraud, their struggles with loyalty versus obligation, their fears about taking action against trusted colleagues or volunteers. After the conference, Michael and I drove back to Portland. Through the beautiful Oregon countryside, Martha sleeping peacefully in her car seat, completely unaware that her grandfather had just used her mother's crimes as a teaching tool for hundreds of charitable workers. "Dad, I'm proud of you," Michael said as we crossed the Columbia River, "for everything, for investigating Jessica, for having her arrested, for protecting our family, for turning our pain into something that helps other people. I'm proud of you too, son, for choosing to be the kind of father Martha deserves, for building a life based on truth instead of lies. Do you think I should tell Martha about Jessica when she's older?" It was a question we'd discussed many times, and one that would become more complex as Martha grew older and began asking questions about her mother. "I think you should tell her age-appropriate truth at every stage of her development," I said. "When she's 5, she needs to know that her mother made bad choices and had to go away. When she's 15, she needs to know that sometimes people we love disappoint us, but that doesn't mean we're destined to repeat their mistakes. And when she's 25, she'll be old enough to understand that her mother was a criminal who chose greed over love, but that she was also a human being capable of redemption. Martha will decide for herself what kind of relationship, if any, she wants with Jessica." We drove in comfortable silence for several miles, each lost in our own thoughts about the future we were building from the wreckage of Jessica's deceptions. "Dad, there's something I want to tell you. I'm listening. I'm thinking about changing careers, about going back to school to study nonprofit management." I glanced at my son, seeing determination in his profile that reminded me of myself at his age. "What brought this on?" Watching what Jessica did to those organizations, seeing the damage that fraud causes to charitable work, listening to you speak today about the obligation to protect vulnerable people. I want to be part of the solution. That's a big change from computer programming. Programming pays well, but it doesn't feed my soul. I want to work for organizations that help people, and I want to help protect those organizations from predators like Jessica. I felt pride swell in my chest, not just for Michael's decision, but for the man he was becoming in the aftermath of betrayal. "Your mother and I will support whatever decision you make, even if it means less money and more uncertainty. Michael, your mother and I have enough money to support 3 generations of our family. What we care about is that you're living a life that has meaning, that contributes to something larger than yourself, like you did with the bookstores, like you're going to do with whatever path you choose." That evening, we had dinner at the same restaurant where Michael had told us he was engaged to Jessica 3 years earlier, but this time Martha was with us, gurgling happily in her high chair, while Dorothy fed her mashed sweet potatoes. "To new beginnings," I said, raising my glass of wine. "To family," Michael added. "To truth," Dorothy concluded. We clinked glasses while Martha banged her spoon against her tray, completely unaware that she was participating in a celebration of justice, redemption, and the complicated work of building love from the ashes of betrayal. Outside the restaurant windows, Portland spread out beneath us, a city full of non-profit organizations working to help children and families in need, organizations that were a little bit safer tonight because one grandfather had chosen to fight for truth instead of enabling lies. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Martha would continue growing. Michael would begin exploring graduate programs, and somewhere in federal prison, Jessica would continue serving the sentence she'd earned through years of calculated cruelty. But tonight, we were simply a family, sharing dinner, protected by truth and sustained by love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than before. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. 2 years later, I found myself back where this story began, at a gender reveal party. But this time, everything was different. Michael had remarried a wonderful woman named Sarah who worked as a social worker and had met him during his graduate studies in non-profit management. She'd known about Jessica from the beginning, had met Martha when she was 18 months old, and had loved them both unconditionally. Now Sarah was 8 months pregnant with their second child, and our backyard was filled with friends and family, celebrating the upcoming arrival. Martha, now almost 3, was running around with confetti in her hair, completely oblivious to the irony of the situation. "Grandpa John," she called, running toward me with her arms outstretched. "Pick me up. I want to see the box." I lifted my granddaughter, marveling at how much she'd grown, how happy and secure she was despite the circumstances of her birth. She knew that her first mommy lived far away and couldn't visit, but that her new mommy, Sarah, loved her completely. It was age-appropriate truth, gradually building toward full understanding as she grew older. "Are you excited about the baby?" I asked her. "Yes, Sarah says I'm going to be the best big sister ever." I think Sarah's right. The moment came for the big reveal. Michael and Sarah stood together by the smoke cannon, Martha between them, while Dorothy filmed from across the yard. 3 generations of our family, rebuilt from love instead of lies. "On the count of 3, Michael called out. 1, 2, 3. Pink smoke billowed into the air, and everyone erupted in cheers. Another granddaughter was on the way, another chance to love unconditionally and raise a child with truth and integrity. As the celebration continued around us, I found a quiet moment to reflect on the journey that had brought us here. 2 years ago, I'd been excluded from a similar celebration by a woman who'd viewed me as an obstacle to her criminal plans. Tonight, I was the patriarch of a family that had survived deception, chosen justice over comfort, and found redemption through honest love. My phone buzzed with a text message. I was surprised to see it was from Agent Hendricks, who'd arrested Jessica over 2 years earlier. "Mr. Doe, thought you'd want to know. Jessica Martinez has completed her education program in federal prison and has been teaching literacy classes to other inmates. Her instructor says she's genuinely committed to using her skills to help people learn to read. People can change, even in the worst circumstances." I showed the message to Dorothy, who read it with a thoughtful expression. "How do you feel about that?" she asked. "I feel like justice and mercy are both being served," I said. "Jessica is paying the price for her crimes, but she's also finding a way to contribute something positive to the world. Do you think Martha should know about this someday?" I think Martha should know that people are complex, that even those who do terrible things are capable of growth and redemption. But that knowledge doesn't erase consequences or excuse criminal behavior. As the party wound down and guests began leaving, Sarah approached me with Martha sleeping in her arms. "John, I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For doing the hard thing 2 years ago, for choosing truth over comfort. If you hadn't exposed Jessica, if you'd chosen family loyalty over moral obligation, Michael and I might never have met. Martha might have grown up in a home built on lies and criminal money. I'd looked at my sleeping granddaughter, peaceful and secure, in the arms of a woman who loved her not because of biology, but because of choice. Sarah, I hope someday when Martha's older, when she faces difficult moral choices, she'll remember that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. She'll remember, and she'll be proud of her grandfather who fought for truth when truth was difficult. That night, after everyone had gone home, Dorothy and I sat on our back porch looking out at the Portland skyline. Somewhere in that city, charitable organizations continued their work helping children and families in need, a little bit safer because one family had chosen to expose fraud instead of enabling it. "Do you ever regret how we handled things?" Dorothy asked. "Never, not for a single moment, even knowing it cost Michael his marriage." Dorothy, Michael's marriage to Jessica was built on lies. What he has now with Sarah is built on truth. Martha is growing up in a home where she's loved unconditionally and told the truth age-appropriately. Another grandchild is on the way, conceived in love instead of manipulation. I paused, thinking about everything we'd been through, everything we'd learned about justice and mercy, truth and consequences. 2 years ago, Jessica thought she could exclude me from my family's celebrations because I was inconvenient to her criminal plans. Tonight, I celebrated the announcement of another grandchild, surrounded by people who love truth more than comfort, who choose integrity over convenience. And Jessica is learning to teach literacy to women in federal prison. She's finding a way to contribute something positive to the world, even while paying the price for her crimes. That's more than I hoped for when I first discovered what she was doing. Dorothy reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine, the way they had for 33 years of marriage. "I'm proud of you, John Doe, for all of it. I'm proud of us, for surviving a predator's attack on our family, for choosing justice over convenience, for building something beautiful from something terrible." We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of Portland settling in for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Sarah's pregnancy to monitor, Martha's continued development to nurture, Michael's growing career in non-profit, management to support. But tonight, we were simply a family that had chosen truth over lies, justice over comfort, love over manipulation. We were people who'd learned that sometimes protecting the ones you love requires making choices that feel like betrayal, but that real love always chooses truth in the end. As I held Dorothy's hand on our back porch, I thought about the question I'd posed at that gender reveal party 2 years ago when I'd interrupted Jessica's celebration with evidence of her crimes. I'd asked the audience if they would have done the same thing I did. Tonight, I had a different question for anyone who might be listening. If you discovered that someone you loved was systematically harming innocent people, would you have the courage to choose justice over family loyalty? Would you protect the vulnerable over the comfortable? Would you choose truth over the easier lie? And you? Would you have done what I did? I want to know your opinion in the comments below, because sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes protection means exposure. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is the gift of truth, no matter how much that truth might hurt. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell because there are more stories of ordinary people making extraordinary moral choices. Stories of justice, redemption, and the complicated work of loving people enough to tell them the truth. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing that truth matters, that justice is worth fighting for, and that even the most broken families can be rebuilt on foundations of honesty and love. Until next time, remember, respect is not an optional invitation. Family is something you must also earn, And sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable the person you love to continue hurting others. This is John Doe, signing off. See you in the next story.